There come the attendees. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Dave Gash. I am in Southern California, where it is 9:45 a.m. I'd like to introduce Adilice Sanches. Adilice is actually in Denmark at the moment, where I believe she said it is 6:45 p.m. So that's not too bad. As we discussed, some of our international speakers sometimes have to get up at 2, 3, 4 in the morning in order to fit our schedule out here on the West Coast. But not too bad for Adilice. I love this title, Adilice. I was looking at this product research as risk mitigation. I think that's a fascinating idea. I'm excited to hear your talk on this. Very quickly, I'll remind everybody, don't ask to share your audio and video because this is a view-only session. If you have any troubles seeing or hearing Adilice or her slides, let me know. We'll get Paul involved. Paul is our technical guy. He will help straighten things out. If you have any issues, feel free to chat amongst yourselves in the chat box, actually. Attendees do that a lot. They just talk amongst themselves, and that's perfectly okay. And as you have questions, as questions come up during her talk, please type those into the chat box, and that way Adilice can either address them if they're pertinent at the moment, or I can save them and we'll do them toward the end of the session, whatever she feels comfortable with. So I'm going to bow out here, but remain in the session. And Adilice, take it away, please.
Thank you, Dave, for such a great introduction. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Please add your background. I'm very curious about what is the background that different people have that joined this session. Also, because my background is very uncommon, I would say, a mixed bag of things. So my name is Adilice, and I'm a staff product researcher at Pleo. I'm here today to talk about product research as a risk mitigation strategy for product development, in particular for digital product development. So who am I? I'm originally from Cape Verde Islands, which is a very small archipelago in the middle of the Atlantic. And I grew up in Portugal. And for the past 6-7 years, I've been living in Copenhagen, Denmark. Strangely embracing the cold for some reason. Previously, I worked as an architect, consultant, and product owner. So as I mentioned, a very mixed background of things, but I do see a red thread where everything I've done has been about trying to understand how can we build better for people. And currently, as I mentioned, I'm a staff product researcher at Pleo, an expense management solution for forward-thinking teams everywhere. So what does it mean to be a product researcher? For me, being a product researcher means working with different product teams to ensure that we continuously develop needs-based solutions. That sounds nice or very simple to some extent, but it's not. How can we continuously develop need-based solutions? I think this has been one of the biggest challenges in product development, and the discipline of product development is fairly new. So this means that as we go every year, there's new terms, new strategies, new approaches, models, frameworks, but also new roles. And product research is one of the new terms and disciplines emerging. So we continuously translate need-based solutions by making sure that we add the customer voice and customer input in what we are doing in every step of the way. And in the agenda for today, I'll introduce a little bit more what is product research to my eyes, but feel free to also comment what has been your experience with research, with usability testing, being explorative research, quantitative research, what have you tried in the past? Then I will also talk about the value it adds to product teams. And finally, what do we mean with minimize the risk as we go? So what is product research? Traditionally, research has been added at the beginning or at the end of digital product lifecycle. This means that to some extent, we've been good at doing, as a society, at doing explorative research. So trying to understand what challenges do our customers face. And then we also have been good at including evaluative research, especially when it comes to design, usability, interface. And this is where we question, were we able to help our customers? But during development, there's a lot of other questions that emerge beyond how can we solve those challenges. So to answer this big question, you actually need to gather a lot of information and different types of information. So adding iterative research to agile development is what is the essence of product research. So it's about focusing on what problems should we prioritize, or is this a problem we can really solve with the resources we currently have? What will bring the most value? Is this solution technically feasible? So it's about understanding all of these questions, identifying these questions that you find along the way, the unknowns that you encounter, and using the customer voice to also understand how can you reprioritize as you go, and according to the business opportunities or strategy and the resources you have available. So when you miss doing this, and when you miss creating this safety net and this confidence in the decisions you make during product development, you can quickly fall into the trap of believing that you are using customer insights because you are at the beginning or at the end, but not mixing it in the development lifecycle creates this fail-fast culture that is unable to meet the high expectations of the new digital native generations. So while maybe having a little bit of explorative and some evaluative research in 2000, early 2000 would have been enough, today is not, because products are better, expectations are higher than ever, and the customer is getting more used to what a good experience should be. A good example is Apple Maps. I'm a big fan of Apple products. So it hurts me, pains me a little bit to talk about this use case, but I think it's a perfect example. So in 2012, Apple decided to replace Google Maps on iOS 6 with their own navigation platform. That's how Apple Maps was born. But as soon as it hit the market, several issues started to emerge. For example, a new 3D view was released, but it had some mistakes that customers were unwilling to tolerate based on the expectations that they already had at that point. And the overall reliability of the product and its many functions were just not done, or within the definition of done that most high quality products at Apple have. So I think that this was also a very big learning lesson because there was not one thing that was incredibly wrong with the product. It was just a combination of many different things. So from that point onwards, of course, it became very important to listen to customer feedback and iterate on improving the product, which now is really, really good. So beyond the initial value proposition, questions that should have been answered during development were never really solved. And if we look at the business model, it made sense that beyond Google Maps, there was no big competitor when it comes to navigation, individual navigation platforms at the time, right? So there was a need for it and for another player to come in, but there was some hit and misses in trying to understand how could that problem be addressed. So product research is a new term to expand and structure iterative research across the entire product development lifecycle. So we have, as I mentioned, the explorative research, evaluative research, and then everything else that falls in between. And more, we become more experimental, and we find new ways of doing research, testing concepts, hypotheses, wireframes in this space to make sure that when we try to define how we solve a problem, product teams can find the answers to other questions that come up. So in essence, product research creates room and tools to inform product decisions on an ongoing basis. And what is the value it adds to product teams? This is also a really big question. As I mentioned, product development is still at its infancy. We have a lot of new specializations emerging out of this space, and I don't think we're even halfway through, because the technology is ramping up so fast that there is a need for us to mature also our capabilities in managing and creating value in digital solutions. So, great feature. This is probably the dream of every product team, that they will start a customer interview and this is the initial feedback. But when they say great feature, if you are able to do the changes I've suggested, that kind of changes a little bit the context of what that person is saying. Or our current option works well, but great feature. And then we also have a situation where the customer says, great feature, but my team is not really ready to use it. So it's very interesting that the same feedback can change so much depending on what you say before or after. So context here is key, because it's what will define the meaning of what is being said. And product research is expanding context of the problem and therefore of the solution. When we start developing something because we know there's a need for it, we cannot just run with it and just expect to make all the decisions we need to and still be a very successful product. There needs to be some feedback loop, some iteration in there, because the development part is, first of all, very costly. But as I mentioned, markets are very competitive and consumers are very demanding. So it is important to raise the bar. But how can we do that? How can we add this iteration? A good example is a beta program with it. I think that a lot of you are probably familiar with the concept of beta testing, which is when you release a product to a selected number of customers and collect their feedback before releasing to the general public. But the beta program was something we did before release. So it was a concept for testing ideas, something from an idea to lo-fi prototypes. So over a period of time, we built the value with customers in order to reach the MVP. This program was set to be 3 interviews with the same customers to learn from our customers' experience and understanding of how Pleo could help companies solve their day-to-day issues. And we started this program with some very open and exploratory interviews and some design games where we did some card sorting, to then moving into testing MP, so a minimum product, and trying to validate the assumptions or hypotheses we had regarding what would be the value factor in it. And finally, we also use these iterations to be able to redefine and prioritize what needs to address first. So initially, this was supposed to be 3 different calls with the same group of customers, but it ended up being 5. And this was a very successful collaboration because not only customers would come back to the interviews and knowing exactly what would be expected of them to provide feedback and creating the trust for them to provide very transparent and clear feedback, we also had the opportunity of making customers feel heard to the point where they would go home, think about some of the questions and discussions we had, and in the following session, actually change their answers or go a little bit deeper. Very interesting concept. So I would definitely recommend and would like to experiment with this further in the future. We have also another example, which is routines, which is also a very interesting concept. So how can we translate insights into development tasks? This is one of the biggest questions and things that different teams struggle with, which is once you have the insights, once you've done the research or the validation, how can that be translated into development tasks or communicated to the team? How can a backend developer know how their task is responding to a customer need? So usually we have the insights as a final presentation, and this could be a deck, it could be a Notion page, it could be a very lengthy report, it could be a lot of different things. And then we have the development backlog that can be user stories, tasks, or bugs. So to try to make this transition smoother, we try to use new digestible deliverable formats that we, as of right now, call routines. So a routine is something in between an insight and in between a user story. So it's about adding a little bit of context regarding some of the tasks you would have on the backlog. So this in-between documentation adds this user context to a group of stories. So when we look at this a little bit more into depth, we can see that in this particular case, we have something regarding export for bookkeeping. So as someone responsible for exporting expenses, my job titles can be, and then you have different options. My goals are to ensure that we bookkeep our transactions correctly, to spend the least amount of time chasing missing receipts, to use automation to make my day-to-day easier. And then we also have my day-to-day tasks, which are very much related to the user stories that then would be picked up by the development team. But we also have some of the worries that these personas would have, and what are the drivers behind those actions. So adding this context is creating a little bit of a storyline to what is it that the team doing the development needs to do. It's trying to give some faces and some names and pushing a little bit more what personas and using a persona format has done for PMs in the past. And then we have the third and final chapter of this presentation, which is about minimizing risk as we go. One of the most important things here, I think, is to consider how research and discovery have been walking hand in hand. So discovery is usually seen as the first stage of product development lifecycle. So if you remember the diagram I presented earlier, it started with explorative research. And a lot of times explorative research is also called discovery and vice versa. So those terms are used to replace each other and to some extent mean the same thing. So we have discovery, that means some early business cases or market research, then some recruitment, interviews, analysis, journey mapping. We then have define with some ideation, design specifications, wireframes, concept validation, prototype, user feedback, idea refinement, and develop when we go more into the estimation, design handover, development, code review, pull requests, and release. And finally, the refine part where we can get immediate feedback, data processing, recruitment, user testing, analysis, recommendations. Of course, this is not exactly the same for every team, every company, or even every market. And it doesn't have to be necessarily a linear process, but it's what would be considered the standard life cycle of product development. But in reality, discovery is a word used to describe many different processes. So going from one mindset where discovery is just the first step into discovery being many steps, that's overlap. So my argumentation here is that discovery is actually a continuous process that overlaps with different stages of product development. So this means that what we call discovery at the beginning of the process is actually scoping. And as you move towards development, you will be continuously discovering. And that would be identifying these unknowns, stumbling upon new unknowns on different levels. And after you release, then that process and that discovery continues, but in what would be called a feedback loop. So through discovery as a process, when we look at discovery as a process, we can see that we can have simultaneously several types of discoveries moving at the same time. So this means you have business discovery, which usually tends to be the first one. So there's a business case or a business intention or a business appetite to understand, okay, is there a new market, a new functionality, feature? Is there something new we can explore? Then we have the technical discovery, which is about understanding what are the limitations we have today and what would it take us to actually fix this problem, solve this problem. We also have design discovery, and maybe this one is one that is not talked about in a very explicit way, but it's still very common and very important, which is understanding how have these workflows been solved before, what is out there, what the customers expect, and where are some of the pitfalls. And of course, we have the need discovery, which is what is it that customers really want when it comes to this problem? What is the core problem and what is it that they need? So in this idea, we can see discovery as a process to reduce risk on different fronts. So as you continue with discovery, start and continue the discovery through scoping, through the define process, through the development process and the refine process, you gather more and more knowledge. And this also means that it requires more of a cross collaboration between the PM, the tech lead, the designer, and the researcher. And in some cases, the PM is the one doing the business discovery and the need discovery. In other cases, you have a researcher on the team. Sometimes you have a product marketing manager that will be leading the business discovery. So who does what can vary according to the company's resources and organizational structure. But the important thing is to recognize the need to have these different levels of understanding and to grow knowledge on these different areas. Because if you remove business discovery and then you know how to fix a problem, you know how to design it, and you know there's a need, you can still end up with a product that you cannot commercialize. And the same is valid if you don't have design, or if you don't have the technical discovery, or if you don't have the need discovery. So if you don't have these four elements, things don't look very bright for that product. So product research in digital development lifecycle is this bubble, in a sense, where you have the explorative research in the scoping phase, where discovery starts. And then you have this bubble with define and develop, where there's a lot of back and forward, and it's not at all a linear process. And finally, you have the evaluative research with the feedback loops that you build to make sure that you continue to improve on that experience that you built before. What type of experience have you had with research before? How has your experience with product development been so far? And again, I think this also taps into my initial question of where is your background? Are you here as a PM, as a designer? I would love to hear your thoughts and different perspectives on this, and how the cross collaboration also has been working so far, because I know that it really depends on the exposure and experience that people have had in working across function in the past. So, oh, I think this is, yes. Apologies, wrong slides. So this also takes us to a very interesting part, which is the fact that what happens when you have research, a problem, but no product, and what do you need to do then? So product research is an approach used to assess a direction, hypothesis, or concept that can be represented, but not limited to early wireframes or high fidelity prototypes. So it can just be an idea. But as I mentioned before, usually there's already some type of concept behind it, driving it. Otherwise, you will have explorative research, which a product researcher could still do, but it means that it's more about understanding the needs and the opportunities in the market. So it also overlaps, is also where it overlaps with market research and product marketing. But product research is about product development and working closely with product development. So when is product research relevant? You need these two conditions before you can move with evaluative research or product research. So the problem space has been identified and scoped, and there's a solution to validate or disprove. So there's a concept you are following. And if you're missing one of these things, it becomes very difficult to move forward. So when you have research with a problem, but no product, it means you still need more research before development, or you need someone to make an executive decision coming from a business point of view. And when you have research with a product, but no clear problem to solve, that still means you need more research. And I think that this is one of the most current and famous examples, which is AI. And this could be all the AI programs creating images, or it could be ChatGPT, it could be a lot of different things. But right now we have this technology, and all we know is that it has a lot of potential, but we haven't been able to actually lock what is the biggest potential it has, or what problem is really solving. So it's been used to experiment and search and try different things. So this is a clear example when the technology is running faster than the needs or the problem. So in this case, you are at risk of building something without real value for the customers. So although these things are nice and we can experiment with them, what value are they really bringing at the moment? That can, of course, be very costly for us and a waste of time for our customers waiting for pressing problems to be solved. And right now, we also have, I think the AI example is really good because it's everywhere. Everyone is talking about it because it's new. But once it stops being new and we don't know what problem to fix with it, then it kind of becomes something in the past. There's also other examples, for example, Google goggles or Google glasses. It was interesting for a while, but after a while it stops being novelty. People get bored. So there's a need to try to understand what problem is this really solving. Yes, and again, just to summarize, we have this process and this bubble, and here it can look a little bit linear, but it's way more complex and back and forward than I could express with a diagram. But I hope the bubble at least creates this effect. So what are some key takeaways? I think, of course, we can only do continuously develop need-based solutions by integrating customer insights into development, so into the code itself. There's also a few examples where that I experienced in the past where we could use insights for the infrastructure in the back end, so it doesn't necessarily has to be limited to the interface. In this particular case, we identified the needs for customers to delegate some of their work. So they wanted to challenge our role and permission structure. And that enabled us to create room for that to happen in the structure we set up. So that it would be possible for us at any point in time, if it becomes a business need for us also, to facilitate that. So that's a change that customers will not see on the interface unless we make that decision, but it was important to incorporate that in the back end. And now summarizing some key takeaways. Product research is an approach that creates more room and tools to inform product decisions during all stages of product development. Product research requires an organizational mindset that sees discovery as a process instead of an isolated stage in product development. So it's not just a checkbox. Product research is all about experimentation, but methods and deliverables should be easy to process. And this means easy to process and digest, not only by designers and PMs, but the entire product team. And finally, I think this is the most important point, that continuous research means new information, but more importantly, more confidence in the decisions that you're making on behalf of your customers. So as this concludes my presentation, thank you so much for joining. If you have questions or would like to stay in touch, feel free to find me on LinkedIn, over email, or also try to find out more about Pleo on our website, or visit us in Copenhagen, London, Berlin, Madrid, Stockholm, or Lisbon.
And we're back. Lovely presentation. Thank you so much, Adilice. Beautiful. I really liked your graphics. Your use of graphics was very good, actually. We have a couple of questions if you have a moment.
I do.
Let's see. Sybil asks, who exactly is responsible for connecting the Jira stories to the routines?
That's a really good question. I can go back to that specific slide. So in this particular case, it was a shared responsibility between myself and the PM, because we wanted to see how will this work. So it was, again, one of these experimental things we did. Unfortunately, that PM ended up leaving the company after a while, so we put a stop on this project. But it's definitely something I'll try to drive again. But I think that this is why involving the entire team becomes so important, right? Because depending on the organization, some of these triage of the backlog will fall under the PM or under the EM's responsibility. So trying to make sure that this becomes something that is a shared ritual, is a shared responsibility across the team is very important. But of course, you always need at least one person to be accountable for it.
Good answer. And Adrian asks, when you perform initial user testing and then have the participant come back with responses, do you find bias creeps in to those responses, biases of different kinds? Is that an issue?
Wow, this is really, really good questions. So I think that's definitely a good question. In this particular case, what we were exploring was a new opportunity for the company. So this means that the feedback we were getting was not coming from what they had seen in the product previously. It was more coming from their needs, because we were not addressing that problem space at all. Of course, there's always the reference to different products or solutions they used in the past, and this could be solutions addressing that same problem, or it could be completely different solutions that they try to refer to as a good example or as a bad example. So I think that there will always be some degree of bias of that person's experience. And something that is amazing is that customers, they will always try to give you ideas on how to solve their own problems, because they want their problem solved, right? So there will always be some degree of bias, unfortunately. But I think that's because it was a new problem space, and we started the testing with card sorting, design games, explorative research. It's reduced the bias coming, or the exposure we created from our side. But I think that is definitely something I would take into consideration if the case was about improving an existing solution.
And of course, we all think our own issues are the most important ones, do we not?
Exactly.
And Sam asks a very good question here. It's centered on the discovery phase. He says his company prioritizes speed and cost effectiveness over quality of design. And so as a result of that, the discovery phase suffers because they're going for speed and efficiency. And his question is, do you have suggestions for advocating for discovery when you're working with team members who don't really see the value or constrained from seeing the value because of speed?
Yes, this is another great question. I think this is the biggest challenge when it comes to including research in product development, is that research or discovery is seen as a roadblock for you to be able to ship faster. So this is a problem, right? And I think especially now, where we have the tech industry and the world going through a recession, everyone is worried, speed becomes very pressing. So how can we do that while still making sure that we listen to our customers? I think that's my best advice, which is far from perfect, is actually to try to be creative on what discovery means and where discovery happens. Because if you are not able to do discovery once the team is already doing some scoping, or just has an MVP without talking to a single customer, then it's about trying to minimize the risk from that point onwards. So it's also about not seeing research or discovery as something that can only happen at the beginning. It's about negotiating what is the best you can do from a research perspective with the time frame you have. So all these ideas, all these concepts, the beta testing, or like the beta program, the routines, there's so many different ideas and concepts that we experiment with, because we need to be flexible in trying to find ways to, and workarounds to still input some type of value from a customer perspective in what is being developed. But I think that's the best way to persuade people and to prove the value is actually by showing. If you can show the impact, if you can do that, and show what impact it had or how much cost it reduced the company from having, that would be my best advice. And of course, I think that there's something regarding speed and cost, but also churn, because the true cost of poor experience will also be translated into churning rates, right? So taking those same KPIs that teams and businesses will use to justify not doing research, and turn that against them and say, this is exactly why we need to do research.
Right. And finally, Jess has more of an observation than a question, but it's really good. I just read it. He says you need to have continuous proactive research that leads to ideas rather than coming up with ideas and then backtracking to research them. I think that's a wonderful little observation. Easier said than done, certainly, but it's a question of sequence or order, I guess, rather than the objects themselves.
Exactly. So that's a really good one, and I think that in an ideal world, definitely you should have both, right? Because at the same time that you're exploring new opportunities, you're still on an ongoing basis being fed with either bugs or issues or opportunities, ideas that customers will provide themselves or provide to us on how to improve their own experience or things they need. So it's about creating this balance where, yes, you strive to understanding what blue ocean concepts are still out there to explore, but also building on the existing. So not neglecting the experience. That's, experiences will always mutate and shift. It's a live organism that you need to care for.
Yeah, so it needs to be an iterative process throughout the entire cycle, not just at the beginning and then.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. We're about at the end of our time here, and I'll remind everybody that the next session will start at 45 minutes past the hour, so that's in about 15 minutes from now. I want to say a big thanks to Adilice. Thank you so much. That was a really, really good session. And thanks to everyone for attending and for your very good questions. Let's see. I think that's it. There's a short break and then the next session. And also remember, everyone, that we're all available all the time. If you would like to connect with Adilice, you can do networking, you can do direct messages and so on. If you have another question, if you think of it later, just leap out there and ask her. I'm sure she will be happy to answer questions, as are we all. And again, thanks to everyone for attending. Thank you again, Adilice, and we will all see you in the next session. And this session has concluded. See you later.
See you.
Bye.